Join us. So, the usual introduction, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to this week's FIPP Insider webinar. The US magazine market is the world's largest and most valuable, and annually the Magazine Publishers of America publish the MPA Factbook, which provides an overview of the latest data and trends from this important market. And we're delighted to be here with you today to bring you some highlights from the 2020 edition, to get together with some additional data from Media Radar, and hopefully together that will help to provide a rounded picture of the current status of magazine publishing in the American market. But before I introduce my guests, let me run through some housekeeping items. Today's session is a mixture of Q&A and slides, but we're also very keen to take questions from as many of you as possible. So if you look in your webinar controls at the bottom of the screen, you'll find the Q&A button. If you go in there, you can submit your questions for our panelists. And you can also upvote other delegates' questions and make comments on them if you've got some answer to add to the question. There's also a chat box, which you can also access through those webinar controls at the bottom of the screen. You can use this to chat privately, either with myself, with the panelists, or with the other attendees, and we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the event. I recommend that you keep it open, because the FIPP team will be posting comments and useful links throughout the event. Now, these events and the work that FIPP does to share knowledge across the industry would not be possible without the support of our partners. PressReader, one of the world's largest digital content distribution businesses, and UPM, the world's leading biofor and paper company. We thank both of them for their support. PressReader have also provided a digital edition of this year's MPA Factbook, and you will get a link to this in the post-event email. I'd also like to thank FIPP's members for the support you give to the organisation. A reminder that in July, we'll be putting most of our content behind a members-only wall on our website. So if you're not members and you want to continue making use of the knowledge and the insight that we provide on the magazine industry globally, we would encourage you to join. Please contact me on james@fipp.com for more details on how to do that. A reminder also that we've now released details of this year's FIPP Congress. Our landmark annual event takes place online for the first time this year, and we've announced the first set of speakers, including James Wildman from Hearst, Vox Media's Erica Anderson, Condé Nast's Wolfgang Blau, and many more. You can see more details on fippcongress.com, and of course you can book your tickets through the site as well. Tomorrow you'll all get a post-event email with more details, and of course everything is on our website, fipp.com. If you've not already done so, I recommend signing up to the FIPP newsletter. That way you can be sure you're never going to miss a session. Right, that's enough from me. It's now time for me to introduce today's speakers. I can see that most of our delegates are also here. So my first guest today is the founder and CEO of Media Radar, Todd Kreiselman. Founded in 2007, it's the most comprehensive data company focused on the ad sales market. And we're delighted that Todd is able to join us to share some of his insights. My next guest is Amy Andrews, SVP of Strategic Investment at Magna Global, a very well-known figure in the industry. Amy is one of the magazine business's biggest proponents, having previously also held positions at Time Inc. and Hearst. And finally, I'm joined by Tamara Barber, Director of Custom Analytics at MRI Simmons. She has 20 years of experience in marketing and research at both clients and agencies. She leads the team responsible for delivering customized research, data, and insights. And crucially for this conversation, she's also one of the authors of this year's Factbook. So Todd, Amy, and Tamara, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to do a lot of myth busting today, and we're going to start with the biggest myth of all, that magazine audiences are in decline. So Amy, while I get the slide share going, can you just tell us the readership numbers? They're looking pretty impressive, aren't they, for the magazine industry?
Yeah, they really are. When you look at on the slide, when it pops up, you'll look at the year-over-year growth. 19 versus 18 is 2%. But if you look at 19 versus 2012, you'll see the growth is a whopping 8.5%. It's important to note that this growth does include the digital editions and subscriptions, not the websites, but the digital editions and subscriptions, which is really evidence that consumers still value the editorial found in magazines, whether it's on the page or on the screen.
And Tamara, just tell us a little bit about how this data is compiled.
Absolutely. So Media Radar is...
That's for Tamara, not Todd. Sorry, Todd.
Oh, sorry.
Just a bit about methodology, Tamara. You're on mute.
Tamara, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
So sorry about that.
That's all right.
This is part of our survey of the American consumer data, which is really the baseline for all of the research that we do at MRI Simmons. And the data that you're seeing here are a part of interviews that we do, and really asking consumers to look at, flipping through the mastheads of a large number of magazines and telling us whether or not they've looked at them either digitally or in print in the past 6 months. So this is truly the overall audience for magazines.
Fantastic. And Todd, is the same picture true for advertising? How's that held up during the pandemic?
So it's been a mix. There is clearly some negative news, and that many companies stopped advertising altogether, not just in magazines, but across all media formats. We saw declines in many categories, whether it was travel, for example, where you'd expect. So we saw a big 47% decline, and that's in advertisers who just stopped altogether. What was interesting to us was for those who stayed, they didn't change their spend much at all. In fact, if you go to that next slide, this is a look at by month, first half of the year through June 2020 versus 19. And here what we saw is that spending for those who were still buying was actually flat across MPA, and this is just on the print side. And what I thought was so telling was actually May and especially June, right? Because even though that pandemic started in March and it was obviously really gaining steam in New York in April, a lot of those ads were already placed and those magazines were being printed. But in May and especially in June, these are decisions by advertisers to continue. And especially in the CPG category, we saw flat or increased spend.
Yeah, and we're going to come on to the category by category analysis there. But as you say on your slide here, is it really the case that the big challenge is that some advertisers are just leaving entirely? I mean, the ones that are staying, they do seem to be holding up with their spend. Is that right?
That is happening. I mean, underneath this top line number, what we see is a myriad of situations. You have on one hand companies like, I was listening to the conference calls for Johnson & Johnson and Unilever and P&G with their SEC call, like with their financial calls. They could hardly contain their excitement. This is like, not from a business perspective, this has been a dream come true. They're increasing their dividends. From a marketing perspective, they've said this is an opportunity to this is all public information. They said they're looking to reframe themselves as saviors, to reshape these brands as modern. And so I think we will see continued advertising as they deploy on that vision, and they are well capitalized right now. On the other hand, if we look at, for example, growth segments like D2C, some D2C companies are doing so well in this market. They don't own retail channels, and so this is great for them. But others are having a tough time, and so we see that there's a bifurcation for sure in the marketplace where, you think about the company away in the luggage market, they depend on the travel market, they're down a ton. But then other markets are doing perfectly fine.
So it's definitely the case, I think, that there are some very high-profile categories that have suffered, and we mustn't lose sight of the other categories that may have done well, and we're going to look at that a little bit later on. So it seems to be a similar story as well, Amy, when it comes to new title launches. Is that the case?
Well, I'm always amazed at the number of new magazines every single year. And it's really no surprise that the largest category you'll see there with 49 titles is special interest. There are publications for every possible interest out there, from hobbies to advocacies and absolutely everything in between. They may be small in circulation, a lot of these, but they have devoted audiences who pay for these magazines. And we continue to see new magazines from the top publishers. In the past year alone, for example, Meredith has launched Millie, a financial title for young women, Reveal, a home design title with the popular TV personalities, the Property Brothers. And most recently, Sweet July, a service magazine with lifestyle guru Keisha Curry. She's the wife of Stephen Curry. All have been very well received by both consumers and advertisers along. So both consumers and advertisers. So, you know, magazines are, you know, they're here to stay. They're not going the way of the 8-track tapes.
Definitely, and we've got both Britta and Liz from Meredith on the call today. So thank you guys from Meredith for continuing to support this sector. And the special interest, the special interest category is absolutely the one that globally is growing the fastest and seems to be where the future of this industry absolutely lies. Let's look at another important question then, Amy, if I'll stick with you for a minute. And this is the question of trust. We live in this era of fake news. We obviously don't want to go through all of the debate that's going on in the public eye at the moment about the trustworthiness of news sources and all of that kind of issue. But this is definitely an area where the magazine industry outperforms its competitors. Is that right?
You know, magazines really have long been a trusted source for consumers. Magazines employ researchers, testers, writers. They have editors on staff. Many of the publishers still employ fact checkers. Consumers know this, and they rely on magazines as a trusted source. And this trusted environment also is very important, as it is safe for advertising brands. You know, even Hearst has a new campaign touting trusted environment for magazines. You know, as my mom used to say, you are the company that you keep. And as you can see on this, you know, on this slide alone, it's really the traditional media and the search engines that are the most trusted versus a social media where literally anybody can go on and say whatever they want. So stay in good company.
Absolutely, and it's fascinating that we're seeing this persistent decline in the trust in social media as consumers and readers in general are waking up to the dangers of the platforms, the fact that they're not moderated, obviously brought to the fore by all of the debate we're seeing around Facebook at the moment. As we're doing a little bit of comparison between different types of media, Todd, I want to come back to you and just ask about relative to competitors such as television. What are you seeing at Media Radar about this?
Well, look, there are a couple trends happening. One of the things we were interested in looking at what is the migration out of television? Television in many ways was the most hurt out of all the media formats in terms of, well, at least for certain channels, for certain networks, you know, any live programming was really cut immediately. So if you think about if you're an NBC on the phone, this was a tough period. You had the loss of MLB and NBA and NHL finals. And so we were curious to see, was there any migration of dollars that ended up with the MPA? And the answer was yes. So 36% of brands that were buying in Q1 ended up moving those dollars to MPA websites. 36% was the number. Now, I broke this out in 4 quadrants just to talk about, look, it's not like all money was going from TV to MPA websites. What this is just illustrating is that, look, some were increasing on the MPA while they were decreasing in television. Some were increasing on the MPA while they were also increasing on television too. And some were declining altogether. If we go look at Carnival Cruise Lines, it doesn't matter what your media format is, they were just shutting down business. And so, but certainly there was a flight to quality over Q2. And it was interesting, you know, this topic of audience trust, you know, there was a big rush to OTT and connected television that we saw in unbelievably fast in April and May. By June, it started to come back, and like it started to decline. A lot of brands said, you know what, it's actually not delivering the results. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just it wasn't delivering the results that necessarily some brands wanted. And so I do think this is an opportunity for the MPA and for magazines more generally to shine because of the quality of the content and the safety of the content.
It's definitely the case that this is a much more nuanced picture than people might think to begin with. It's not the case that there's been a universal trend in terms of spending patterns from what you're showing us there. There's a lot of subtlety in the way that different brands are reacting to the crisis. Then the impact here on the various media formats, just talk us through that.
Look, from a revenue perspective in magazines and in newspapers, newspapers and magazines for sure in June had the most negative impact, and that is not surprising at all, because those June issues, the decision to purchase of those June issues had to have been made in April and early May. And that was the time when we were in the deepest point of the trough. In contrast, if we were to look at someone like an NBC or a CBS and break them out individually, their trough would have been in April and the first bit of May. They're a much more real-time exchange. So if people wanted to pull out, they could, and they did.
Yeah, I mean, we can see that in the graph, can't we? There's a huge dip there in March for television, and the dip for magazines and newspapers came a lot later. So it'd be interesting to see. When do you expect that we might see the first results from the post-pandemic period, Todd?
I would expect as we look at September issues, we would start to really see that.
Okay.
You know, so I don't think we'll see a lot of change in August. Also, a lot of titles don't have a dedicated August issue, so the sample size for that month would be not material enough.
Amy, let's just carry on with this theme of looking at magazines versus television shows. One of the most fascinating pages from the current Factbook, I think, is this one here, where we understand that magazines reach more adults than primetime TV shows. Just tell us about that.
Amazing, isn't it? And I think what's most amazing about this chart is the strong magazine reach indices for the youngest audience segment, that digitally crazed youth, the 18 to 34. Also, tying back to what Todd just said, the strong performance for magazines against men, which is, especially interesting since the highest rated television programming includes sports. It's just more evidence of the decline, in my opinion, of linear television, and speaks to the enduring consumer enjoyment of magazines.
Definitely, something we're seeing again globally, and the amount of over-indexing as well is incredible, I think, here. Just a reminder, those of you in the audience, if you have questions about any of these slides, or if you want to ask our panelists anything, then please do use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll jump in with questions as we go along. While you think about what those questions might be related to this slide, Amy, we understand that magazine advertising is also kind of more engaging and delivers a higher return on spend. Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, and it's really across the board in every engagement measurement that you see there. Magazines are indexing over 100, whereas the websites and television really are not. The lower, and what's important about this too, and interesting, is they're paying attention, they're getting the valuable information, including, helping to make purchase decisions. These are the lower funnel engagements that are often thought to be exclusive domain of digital, of social, search and social for most advertisers. So, with this stellar performance, it should really come as no surprise that magazines, and this goes to the next slide, have the highest return on advertising sales, or ROAS, when compared to television and digital. It's also important to note that this is a compilation of studies, of all of the studies from NCIS starting in 2005 through the first quarter of 2019. So it's not a fluke, it really is a history, and the power of print is really driving sales and has succeeded the test of time.
I mean, that again is astonishing, the gap between magazines, TV and digital, and the fact that you're seeing there a very clear return on investment beyond what people might think anecdotally.
Exactly.
Let's delve a little bit deeper into this question then of magazines against digital. Todd, what can you tell us about overlap between the two and how this has changed?
So when we looked at overlap, it's not that slide, it's going to be
not that one, my apologies.
There we go. Yeah, that's perfect. So one, we started to see an increase, and this is a material increase in terms of the buyers who are buying an integrated program.
Right.
Right. And this is actually much higher than what we see, even the starting point of April at 14%. That may seem like a low number, but just to sensitize you on something like television, it's actually much lower. Like if you were to say, what % of television's advertisers also buy on their websites, that number is like 3 or 4, it's small, 3 or 4%. So we see an increase, and this reflects the way media is being purchased, and also the strength of MPA magazine websites and the audiences that they bring. These are desirable websites. Their content is, this idea of safety to me and brand quality is only becoming more important. And so that's something that I think MPA publishers really differentiate themselves for sure on.
A little bit of a kind of slight tangent question. Do you think this means that advertisers are understanding now that magazine brands are genuinely 360-degree brands, and they think of them that way rather than television brands where they think of them as being single format entities?
So I think there is a migration happening there, an evolution happening there. The reason I pause is I don't think we're at a place where it's as strong as it should be, James. I feel like I would love to see more brands make that decision. And we're starting to see it. We're starting to see more, first of all, more companies are moving their business in-house.
Yeah.
Not a flood or a tidal wave, but certainly year over year, the last couple of years, we've seen more of those companies, and that ebbs and flows. But that we do observe that there's more ad buying that's integrated.
Yeah.
Cross formats when the buy is made in-house. And
I know you've done some analysis as well that people will be very interested in on category winners and losers. I wonder if we could spend a little bit of time just looking at that, with starting with the winners, the increasing categories. Just talk through that for us and tell us what that shows us.
So the reason I smiled is that this was an analysis I would have never guessed if you had said what will happen after a pandemic.
Yeah.
The sale of beauty products, and I don't mean fragrances, but skincare, anything, any type of skincare, oral hygiene is way up year over year. Not just, improving from pre-pandemic, it's meaningfully up, and you can see it month to month there in that, under that beauty column. The increase in spend is not concentrated with one company. It's really the tide is lifting all boats in the story. Food is perhaps more predictable. All of us are eating at home more, a lot more. For those, I think, of us who live in New York, you're no longer eating at the office or on the way or at the train station. You're having either a small meal or buying more cereal or whatever. That's a big change, and the companies have noticed that demand and they're attending to it. Snack food advertising is also up. Frozen food advertising also up. So it's not just like CPG, like companies like Clorox, they're doing fine, but it turned out it wasn't just that. Streaming companies are driving the increase in media spend. So Disney TV, basically Disney Plus and Apple TV, all Apple TV Plus, these are the folks who are driving that piece. There's been a lot of talk about how people are buying pets during the pandemic. That pets, the sale of pets, and then pet-related product is all up also.
I mean, all those categories make sense other than beauty, don't they? I mean, you could intrinsically understand why food, media, pets, and public service, but with beauty, I wonder, there's obviously been a big rush of people doing DIY on their houses. I wonder whether it's the same for themselves. They're doing a little bit.
Well, so actually, Britta, I just saw Britta, you asked, which pieces in beauty. So one is skincare, two is eyes, basically above the mask products for beauty is selling, marketing very aggressively. And then finally, under beauty is also oral care. So the sale of toothbrushes, toothpaste, floss, anything that might contribute to a healthy life and we don't know if that's because of fear about the virus or fear that you're not visiting a dentist as much, but there's definitely more marketing in those segments.
Or that you have to wear a mask and you can smell your own breath.
Also that.
Britta also says above the mask is a new beauty strategy, definitely, as is on-camera webinar beauty, as I'm learning to my cost. Let's look at the category. I've got a question from Nicia Rodwell from Marie Claire, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's look at the categories that have decreased, Todd.
So apparel and accessories is declining, but it's really important to talk about what's happening like in the nuance. So one, accessories are doing much better than apparel. The price point is lower. I've been reading a lot of analyst reports in Women's Wear Daily and McKinsey. You know, there's a price point that's lower that people want to treat themselves. And so accessory sales are doing well. Within apparel, there's a big line between mass and luxury. Luxury during the pandemic has been down on average each week between 60 and 80%. It just has hit a wall. On the other hand, sale of advertising of sneakers, basically comfort clothing, so I don't mean comfort clothing like just gym shorts or something, but just clothing you can wear around the house that's not as showy. We see that it's not up, but it's basically flat. Those brands are doing fine. Skechers, some pieces of Nike. We just saw the sale of Mirror to Lululemon last week. So there are segments that are doing fine within apparel, but the luxury piece is hurting the most. And there's a little sign of recovery there, especially in certain states as they started to open up. In Texas, we saw a lot of retailers. When Texas opened up, we saw a lot of luxury retailers spending, but they've immediately stopped now. Yeah,
that was one of our questions here from Nicia Rodwell from Marie Claire magazine, asking about fashion and luxury spending. So you're saying that's not in a good place?
Not in a good place at all. And we studied a lot of the luxury spending is not just national. A lot of it is really at the local level to support the stores. And basically, the moment the stores opened, like literally the same week they opened, they coordinated their advertising. And we saw big increases in advertising in Florida, California, Texas. But the minute the stores closed, like we saw all the advertising in Miami go up. And then the last 2 weeks, we've seen it abruptly stop.
Incredible. And then the other categories we've got on there, travel, retail, auto, and athletics.
So travel, the only reason travel doesn't look worse is that the local travel associations, state of California, state of Nevada with Las Vegas, they're advertising again. And they're saying, Amy, James, visit us. They won't advertise all across America anymore. So the state of Nevada, Las Vegas is advertising a lot to anyone within about a 24-hour drive of Las Vegas. Same thing with state of California. We see the city of LA, city of San Diego marketing so aggressively to people in Arizona. Come to the water, get away. So that's what's holding up the travel industry. The cruise lines have started, just a couple of them have started in the last few weeks to say, we know it's bad and we're getting ready, but we also want to be good partners. We know you love cruises. So that's coming back. And a lot of them have told us they're even planning campaigns, but they're a little unsure when to trigger the launch of those dollars.
Yeah. I have a question here as well from my colleague Silkia, who's asking, do you foresee any kind of revenge spending, which has happened in China, which opened obviously before everybody else, in the next months as economies open? And do you think, Todd, there'll be any advertising dollars around that?
I do. There's a great story that Financial Times wrote about, and then Washington Post picked it up about the Hermes store reopening in China and how they sold more money in that day than they had sold in like the last year. Yeah. And it wasn't their flagship store. It was like a smaller boutique store. I do think there will be some revenge spending. I think that will be a thing. I think it's just a question of timing, and it'll happen within the first few weeks. I do think there is pent-up demand. I don't think it will be sustained. I do think automotive has started to come back. We've seen the evolution of the creative. At Media Radar, we're tracking the messaging in the creative also. And we've seen that that messaging is shifting the most ambitiously in the automotive category. So, you know, in April, it was thanking healthcare workers. In May, it was like, pay nothing until 2021. We just need to get these cars gone off the lot. And now we see another shift, which is, you know, this car is safe, and this car is a wonderful way to escape and see the country this summer and this fall. And so the messaging and the testing clearly that's gone into it is very visible. The iterations are coming much faster in the automotive market than in other industry verticals.
Neil Parker and Rob Freidlowitz, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name right. I can see you've got your hands up. If you've got a question or a comment, please do post it into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll happily answer that. And while you think about that, Amy, let me come back to you and just ask, as we move towards the close here, let's look at the nature of the magazine audience. What about the audience mix in terms of usage? What's the report telling us about that?
So, you know, the magazine media and content consumption is evolving. The traditional print and digital editions are no longer the single source for this valuable content. While still the largest source, the consumers are finding the content digitally, whether it's on a website, their phones, or consuming via video. The desire really for the trusted content has grown and will continue to grow. And I think the largest jump that we have seen has really been in two categories, and that is the mobile web and video.
Yeah, very much in keeping with what we see in the rest of the world, video and the mobile web being absolutely the winners in this space. And Tamara, let's then just talk about another aspect of the audience, which is diversity and inclusion. Incredibly important topics right now. We've got some data from MRI that supports this. What can you tell us about the nature of magazine audiences in terms of age and general demographics?
Absolutely. And there are a lot of different ways that we can dig in and kind of look under the hood when it comes to these measures here. But in just looking at really broad demographics and the reach right here by age, what we see is that magazines aren't just, you know, the reach isn't just impressive for older consumers or consumers over the age of 25. And in fact, we see really stable readership and reach across those who are under 35 and those who are under 25. And, you know, I think this pairs very nicely with some of the numbers that Amy had talked about around special interest magazines and the fact that there's really something for everyone when it comes to magazines and when it comes to, you know, advertisers really being able to reach targeted groups across different age ranges. And if we go to the next slide and think about these same numbers by race and ethnicity and sexual orientation, we still see this really strong performance and really strong reach across these groups for magazines. And this is still looking at both print and digital editions or digital subscriptions. And in fact, if we take a little bit of a different lens with what's on the left-hand side here and pair reach with actual frequency of reading and how many issues different groups are reading on a monthly basis, you know, we see that with African American consumers and Hispanic American consumers and the LGBT community, they're actually reading more magazines per month than your average adult in the United States. So, you know, thinking about this and all of the different titles that are available for advertisers and really being able to reach niche audiences, I think the data here really proves out from a reader perspective that there's a lot of reach to be had and a lot of different places to kind of think about reaching consumers depending on ethnicity, demographics, and kind of other measures as well.
Yeah, magazine audience is definitely very diverse, and that's something that everybody on the call should bear in mind when they're thinking about advertising spend. Todd, I know you had one extra slide you wanted to look at, which I may have skipped over, so I'm going to go back to it and see if I can find it. Is it that one?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, just tell us about that then.
So the one thing I wanted to add that I thought was really amazing about magazines is that we talked about how there was this very sharp decline in print advertisers, but they were mostly just moving their business to another part of the MPA market. So we saw a gigantic leap, 69% in June. This is the number of advertisers who ended up on MPA websites. And look, we broke this down by programmatic versus direct. Both are up. And to me, again, this is just a sign of the times that basically people feel good. They feel great about this set of brands. This is not some accidental number. We can see that there was a general trend in every month, but it was up 8% was the big, in January was the number, but we saw an enormous leap by the end of the second quarter.
Fantastic, thank you very much. We're coming towards the end of our allocated time, and while the audience thinks of their final questions, if you do have any last questions, now is the chance to ask them. I'm just going to ask all three of you to answer two questions. First of all, how would you sum up the findings from this year in terms of the performance of the magazine market in 2020? Amy, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I think that a lot of people are under the misconception that magazines are, in hospice care, if you will. And they're really not. From the audience being up, I've done my own analysis that will show you that the circulation has remained flat. And, if you look at all of the little indicators all of the indicators that we've looked at today, you'll see that it's really a very healthy market. And it is, and I'm not the first person to say this, it is really, it's not a consumer issue. It's an advertiser issue. And the consumers are still reading their magazines and reading them loyally.
Tamara, your take on that?
Yeah, so, Amy had spoken to a slide about engagement and engagement with advertising and the impact on intent to purchase based on advertising. And there are a number of other data points in the Factbook that look at other measures of engagement, from emotional engagement, how does it make me feel, how relevant is the advertising to the content that I'm interested in, how much do I trust magazines, and comparing it to other media vehicles. So I think there's a really strong message in what we saw here, but also in looking at some of the other content in the Factbook. There's a really strong message that magazines not only have this impressive reach, but have a really kind of impactful engagement message as well.
Thanks. And Todd, just sum up your findings.
Well, look, you asked how was performance for MPA tests. Clearly, on the print side, it was very challenged. On the digital side, there was a lot of success. But I agree with these points. If we look at it, where I'm tracking CPM rates across print and digital, print has looked never more attractive as right now.
And what do you think, Todd, last question, what do you think the new normal of advertising is going to be, and when do you think that might be?
It's interesting. I think the new normal is starting now. I think we saw a lot of companies in April or in March just had a deer in headlights response. And it was a normal response, a rational response. We have to figure out what's happening. And in particular, in New York, where so much of the media buying is concentrated, we were also scared for our lives, and our family, and our friends, and we're moving our office, But now it's very different. Business, it may be not the reality we want, but I think it is increasingly become clear that the new norm will be like this for probably at least a year more. And that means we have to get back to work. That means cruise lines have to get back to work too. And we're starting to see a lot of advertisers come back. And just the tenor of the conversations has decidedly changed. We have to move on and pick up the pieces and go forth.
Definitely. Before we come to Amy and Tamara, I'll give you a chance to think about your answer. We have a question from Aaron Caruso, who says, the two biggest hurdles I've come across in getting advertisers to buy print magazine advertising is lead time and attribution. Are there any initiatives on these fronts, maybe to use digital print or somehow matching online and offline data together? And what's the best response to these questions in your opinion? Who wants to take that one? That's quite a lengthy question. Somebody better volunteer, or I'll come to somebody.
I think there are two parts of that question, right? One is lead time,
yeah,
and one was attribution.
Yeah.
Right. So lead time is something that's always been an issue, but I know from pushing magazines that you can get the we can push and push and push and get creative there later and later and later. And I think it's something that the magazines do continue to need to work on, to improve, to shorten that lead time. I think it's gotten a lot better. I think it can be under 2 months or 8 weeks when really pushed, as opposed to the 10 weeks that it used to be. You know, that will always be what it is, but hopefully we can help with that a little bit by pushing. And I think the magazine publishers are starting to realize that. I'm not sure, really, maybe Tamara on the research front would have a better idea on the attribution. That is a big challenge.
Tamara, thoughts on that?
Sorry.
Yeah,
Tamara.
I mean, I don't have any numbers on attribution. So, I mean, I can, oh, yeah, go ahead, Todd.
No, no, finish your thought, and then.
No. I was going to say, you know, I don't have any numbers per se on attribution. I can say from a consumer standpoint, you know, obviously there are media behaviors that are changing, and, you know, you know, this shift to reading in home versus out of home, and, you know, more access and looking at, you know, digital versus kind of other media that people may have been using on their commutes, or, you know, when sports were in play, et cetera. So I think from that point of view, it's, you know, important to think about the overall media mix and the fact that, you know, magazines are not just print, there are digital opportunities now as well, and thinking about these integrated media buys.
Todd, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, for sure there is phenomenal attribution in some categories. You know, I think about the work that IRI or Nielsen Catalina does. Meredith has gone so far to offer a guarantee. You don't offer that guarantee. It's like a casino. You don't offer that guarantee unless you know the house is going to win. So they know how to organize a campaign and create a campaign that's going to lead to success. They'd obviously never want to pay someone back, and I know they either never have or rarely have. I think it's never. And so I'm speaking a little bit for Meredith out there, and I guess I react a bit stronger on it. But I came originally from the magazine side and then worked in digital. I've been at Media Radar for almost 15 years. But I see good attribution in magazines, especially MPA magazines. I think it is tougher for smaller magazines that don't have, you know, so if you're a regional magazine, or you're just small, you don't have the research budget to really prove that's harder for them. But with the larger firms, I feel like they've been so far they've been pushed so much over the last 10 years that they've architected attribution really well.
Fantastic. We had I was frantically kicking away there through the MPA Factbook slides because we had a good point there from Liz Vacariello from Meredith. Nice to see you, Liz, who's asking about the levels of reader engagement as they are isolating the really high subscriptions and sub-renewals that we're seeing. Absolutely right, Liz. We're seeing that definitely across the board. And in the Factbook, there is more data on that, including this fantastic slide on the fact that readers still love the touch and feel of a printed magazine, and that's providing comfort for them. I can't unfortunately show it right now, but that's absolutely there. And Britta has also commented on the sales guarantee element as well. So thank you very much for that. We were going to finish by asking about the new normal of advertising, which Todd's already had a go at. Amy, do you want to tell us what you think, what the new normal of advertising is going to be and when that might be around?
I think I would say I agree with Todd on that. I think we are sort of in this new normal, and you know, it is going to be this way for a while. And you know, the challenge will be to find new ways to connect with the consumers, and to continue to give them the content that they need and want on a regular and timely basis. But I think this is the new normal for the foreseeable future.
And Tamara, what about your view on this?
I think everybody has has really summed it up well, that, you know, as much as advertisers and publishers can remain nimble and be plugged into research that you know, Todd is doing at Media Radar, that we're doing at MRI Simmons, I think we are doing our best to make sure that advertisers and publishers are plugged into where consumers are at in terms of their aptitude for spending, and their interest in media and how those media habits are shifting.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I think that's about it for today. I think we don't have any more questions from the audience. Thank you very much to our panelists for joining us. I hope you found that useful. A reminder that you can download the MPA Factbook from the link that will be following in the post-event email. Let me pin myself to the screen so that my poor guests don't have to sit and be on public view anymore. So you can download that from the link that you're going to get in the next couple of days. Just a reminder that you can access details of the FIPP Congress through the links that have been shared in the chat, and you can check out more about FIPP.com at our website and learn more about what we do. You can also follow us on Twitter at FIPPWorld, and I'm at FIPPCEO, and learn more about what FIPP does. But for the meantime, that's about it for today. Oh, you'll also get a link to download the slides as well from today's session in your post-event email, so look out for that. But thank you very much in the meantime for joining us. Thank you very much to Todd, to Tamara, and for Amy for their fantastic insight. Thank you very much to the MPA for their work on the Factbook. And thank you all for joining us. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.